So today's project is all about slowing things down, being curious, and sort of noticing things without judgment. A lot of time in art, it's really easy to be discouraged when the art that you're working on, that I'm working on, doesn't quite look the way I expect it to, or I get really frustrated. And I think probably the most important thing about creating art is taking the chance to slow down and notice and be curious and just be aware of things that are around you, that there's lots of wonderful things in the world. And so if you're wondering, by the way, how long it takes to record about a minute of tea steeping, it takes about 45 minutes of raw recording. So for our project today, I'm going to be painting on a small canvas, about 4 inches, with acrylics. And I'm going to use my family of succulents on my desk as inspiration. I'll only be using the primary colors blue, red, and yellow, plus black and white. And my white, I think, needs a little bit of love. And those are the only colors that I'll be using. So those are the only colors that you'll need to create the background of my painting. I will use a little bit of gold at the end for a little bit of splash of sparkle. And as we get started mixing colors, just some good reminders about brush hygiene. Make sure to clean your brush really well between colors. So I've got a bit of blue that I'm mixing with some primary yellow. And blue's a really strong color. So I kept the yellow pretty minimal so that it's mostly a navy dark blue, and I'm adding some black in there as well, just to get a nice dark background. And diving right in with a flat brush, just going to create as even a layer of paint over my canvas as possible. The whole process of painting is absolutely fascinating for me. I enjoy it so much. And this first part of just laying down just a block of color is really a lovely way. It's sort of like the deep breaths in preparation for yoga, or some sort of like challenge that you're going to take on. It's the first part just to sort of prepare yourself and prepare your space and your body for taking on something that might be a bit of a process. And so just enjoy the process of putting paint down, getting it even. I like to make it as even as possible, and so I used a little bit of a thicker flat brush to achieve like a really smooth layer of paint. And then for my first layer of plants, I'm using the same background color, and I'm adding just a little bit of white and a little bit of yellow just to brighten it up a bit, create some contrast. And I'm just mixing it with that flat brush, but I'm going to paint with this small round brush. Pretty much the whole painting is going to be with this small round brush. This brush helps create the shape of leaves really nicely. And so with these first couple of succulents, I think this is true for usually when I'm painting. I'm sort of timid as I get started. Mostly getting to know the canvas and getting to know the paints and feeling the brush in my hand, getting used to it. And so these first couple of succulents are kind of close to the edge of the canvas. They're kind of tight and not really developed in the way that I want my painting to develop, but I'm just kind of going with it and letting it happen. Noticing that non-judgmentally. In the second one here, I'm starting to play with a little bit of contrast with brightening up my paint with a little bit more white but everything's still pretty tight, and I think by this third succulent I really sort of open it up and kind of get into it a little bit more. And so I'm going for round, long strokes with my brush. I press harder with it as I try to get thicker leaves, thicker lines to create those kind of round, bulbous leaves of the succulent. For these first ones, I'm taking inspiration from my jade plant that I recently got. It's so lovely. One thing I found out about jade plants, I have a cat, and if you have jade plants and you also have a cat, you should know that these are really, really toxic for cats. And so if your cat is a plant nibbler, you might want to keep this one away from them. So yeah, I'm looking at those really round leaves, trying to get not only the shape of the leaves, but the shape of the space between the leaves, which I think is really interesting. Like, there's a lot of interesting curved angles and corners. And to get that leaf shape, I press down with the brush, the tip of the brush, and kind of lift up as I go. So this third succulent I really enjoyed painting. So our whole painting process today is going to be about layers. Layering parts of a plant on top of itself, using different colors between black and white to create depth. So for this next part of the painting, I'm going to be working on the Hawthoria. And I'm mixing up a bit more of that green, and this time I want my green to be really green. And so to get a real bright green, I need a lot more yellow, like a lot more yellow than I used for the first mix. And I'm also going to do a little bit of underpainting with a bright yellow just to start it off. And underpainting is really useful for creating tone in a painting. And the Hawthoria has very differently shaped leaves. They're long and they sort of reach out and they taper off to really fine points. And so with my brush, exact same brush, I'm pressing down harder at the corners and then lifting my brush really lightly as I paint the length of the Hawthoria leaves. I love painting these. This is like this sort of paintbrush work is one of my favorite things about painting. One of my favorite things to do when I'm painting is paint long, smooth lines. And so this was such a pleasure to just sit with and paint a little bit. That's my Hawthoria. I actually had this, I got this one in 2016, I think, so I've had it for 5 years. And then there's a little succulent, I don't know what kind it is, it's right next to there. I found that one in a trip to California a couple weeks ago. I stopped at a rest stop in California, and this tiny succulent was just sitting in a parking space next to where I parked. And so I picked it up and I took it home with me in a paper towel and decided that my Hawthoria needed a little friend. So the layering helps create depth in the painting. I'm going right over one of the jade plant paintings with another Hawthoria, and I'm going to do it again here too, just to kind of create like a sense of depth. And you know, these plants are on top of each other, kind of like a garden, painted garden. And then on top of the underpainting, so the underpainting is all that pale yellow, I'm going in with that bright green that I mixed up. Yeah, maybe I darkened up the green a little bit more with some of that background blue, and then also laid some just primary yellow on top just to create the sense of different leaves coming out in front of others. And at the very, very tips, my Hothoria is a little bit dry. I'm working on rehydrating it slowly, but it has these little yellow tips that I actually think aesthetically are pretty. So I added those in as well. And of course those little white striations, I'm not sure what those are. I need to research more about my own plants. So creating those little details, those little shiny bits on the Hothoria really make it come alive. Especially when there's an opportunity to put something bright against something dark, having a lot of contrast. That's where the magic is in painting, I think, at least in this kind of painting. So like I said in the beginning, this whole project is about slowing down, kind of taking each step as its own, really grounding in the work. So if you are a person who gets anxious about your creative ability, wants to be creative, but you find it's difficult and that can be discouraging, then this could be a really good project. You don't need a lot. You just need a little canvas, couple of brushes, and 5, maybe 6 if you want to do the gold part at the end. 5 colors of acrylic paint, couple jars of water, couple rags. You got yourself a painting party. And also the great thing about acrylic paints is that you can keep painting in layers on top of layers, and so if something doesn't quite look the way you'd like it to, like some of those early jade succulents that I had in the beginning, you can just paint directly over them. No one has to know. I've painted multiple times over the same canvas. So the next succulent that I'm going to do, my painting is this one, ? I'm not sure what this one's called. I don't think it's an Echevarria. I don't think that's even how that's pronounced, but I don't think it's that. I'm not sure. In the comments, let me know. What kind of succulent is this? What kind of plant is this? It didn't come with a lot of information. It came with a thing that was like, hey, I'm a succulent. I don't need a lot of water all the time. And that's about it. And Google image search has not been super helpful, but I guess I could probably try harder. So I mixed up a little bit of purple, straight up red and blue, a little bit more red than blue, and then also lightened that up with quite a lot of white, and that just, like, I think it really kind of makes the whole thing pop. It's such a different color from the green, but it's sort of related to the blue. It just kind of brings everything together. Everything's got this sort of, subdued, jewel-toned color here that I think it pulls it all together. So, and for these leaves, I start off, with the tip of my brush, and then I push down through all of the bristles to create a pointed leaf that has a rounded bottom. And something else that I love about this kind of painting is that it really doesn't have to be perfect to be beautiful, to be enjoyable. I'm looking at my succulents, but I'm not too fixated on what I paint to look exactly like what I'm looking at. I'm more noticing shapes and colors and enjoying the process of mixing the colors together, kind of, the what's fun about working with primary colors is that you can make pretty anything at all with those 5 colors, those 5 paints. So after I've done this lilac sort of layer with the light purple, I'm going to go in with kind of a brown, which is made up of red and a little bit of the green, a lot more red than green, because I want it to be kind of reddish. The leaves of my succulent have sort of like a red at the tips, and so I'm trying to work with that a little bit on top of this purple underpainting. And I'm using some white, and I'm blending directly on the canvas with the tip of my brush. I lay different colors down next to each other, and then I blend them in with the brush on the canvas. And that gets me sort of that like gradation in color from the tips to the centers. I'm going to leave the centers a little bit brighter, or at least I'm not going to worry about blending them as much, because I'm going to layer this succulent with layers of leaves. I'm going to keep going with new leaves on top of the painting. So the centers I'm going to leave just sort of as they are, and then go back over with new leaf shapes with brighter colors. And I think this one is just white, just straight white out of the tube, to create a base for what will be a really pale green. So this green I mixed up is a little bit of the green that I mixed up previously for the Hawthoria, a bit more yellow, and then some white on top of it, and it gets a really nice sort of light sage green. And then I'm going over it just barely with the very, very tip of my brush with a little bit of that pink from the previous layer, just at the tips. And painting from the tip toward the center with really light, short strokes. And that effect comes out really cool in the end. It looks almost like those leaves are transparent, like you can see the bottom leaves behind them, which isn't how the plant is in life, but I think it looks cool in the painting. And then for some of these, I'm doing just one more layer of super bright, light green, white. Using that same brush stroke, starting with the tip and then pulling down with the fullness of the brush to create the roundness of the leaf as it connects to the plant. And then finally, I think this one is going to be another jade, just with a brighter green, because I kind of covered up all my jades that I really enjoyed. And that's okay, they were meant to be in the backgrounds, that's why they're so subdued. But I really wanted my jade to have a little bit of spotlight, because these 3 are my main succulents. And the jade itself also has a little bit of reddish hue at the tips, and so I'm using the same pink red that I used for the previous succulent just to create some definition around those rounded jade leaves. And then this very, very last one is that little foundling succulent. It kind of seems like the other ones in the skull cup, and so I'm sort of painting it in a similar way but with a different shape. I should really look up what kinds of succulents these are. I'm underpainting with that bright green, and then I'm going to go over it with the darker green. And I was really liking sort of the stripy brush strokes I was getting out of that, so I kept those in. just for some texture. I love the way this turned out, and this is totally a perfect place to stop. If you're feeling like this is lovely, you can stop right there. I'm going to take it a little bit further and do a little bit more painting and, you know, setting up my little space here, making sure that I have everything I need, including a very full mug of coffee. Definitely trying to make sure to not accidentally put my coffee too close to my water cups, because, you know, don't want to accidentally put my brush in my mug. And then of course I've got snacks. So the step further here is going to be using a little bit of iridescent gold, soft body from Golden. And man, this little tub has lasted me quite a long time. Lots of paintings have been adorned by this exact tub of paint. And so what I imagine I'm going to do is create a gold border around the canvas and just sort of like a big bold brush stroke in the middle that sits on top of everything and has a little message on it. And so kind of picking out, how do I want that to be oriented, what feels like, you know, the right way, the most comfortable way for the painting to sit. Especially since I have all of those bright succulents kind of cascading down one side, it seems like going across the middle like this is probably, it feels the most balanced as I'm looking at it. Because it can go any way, I mean, it could be anything. Just taking time to consider, what have I created and what can I do with it? And something I noticed while I was working on this was that, ooh, I could make the very tips of the Hawthoria a little golden as well. And so I got my really small round brush out again. Just dipped the tip into the gold just a little bit. To paint the Hawthoria tips. I really love sparkly things, so they show up quite a bit in my art. If there's a way to add glitz and sparkle, or even, oh my gosh, if I can add something glowy to a painting or an illustration, I will find a way to do that. I almost, and I might still do this later, put a little bit of glow paint in the center of those really bright succulents. I don't think it's needed, I just think it's really cool to add a touch of magic when you can. Okay, so be bold. You know, like, I spent all this time painting this, I think it's lovely. To go in with a slash of gold is a really big move, and sometimes you just gotta do it. Commit. You know, if it's the fear of messing something up, I don't know, you don't really need that fear. Because in all honesty, you're probably going to mess it up. That's what I tell myself. This is the interior voice that I have when I'm painting and I'm attempting things. Like, hey, don't worry about messing up. You probably will anyway. And then I just go for it. And what really, you know, I realize is that this idea of messing up is highly subjective. Just because something turns out not the way I expect it to doesn't mean that it's messed up, doesn't mean that it's a failure. In fact, some of the things that I like the most, you know, are times when I feel like, okay, this isn't going well, and I've pushed through and I've tried different things and I've let go of the anxiety that I will mess up, because, you know, it's just paint. It's just paint and a teeny tiny canvas. might as well just try something with it without fear. Or be fearful, but maybe don't let the fear stop you. I think that's kind of the thing. So to create the golden border, I put the canvas on top of one of my jars of water so that it was elevated up from the paper so it wouldn't, you know, wouldn't stick, and I could get all the way around the edges of the canvas. And once you do a big bold thing like that, you know that you can do it again and it'll be totally fine. So if you have the opportunity to act with boldness, to be a little bit brave, always take that chance, I think. If you have the opportunity to be brave and you recognize it in the moment, then that's a really valuable opportunity. I like to really lay it on thick, try to, well, you know, both the message as well as the paint, and then sort of fill in the gaps a little bit later with a second layer. There's a lot of metaphors going on here. Painting is a metaphor for life. And then I just kind of sit and admire my own work for a little while, because it's so shiny. I can't get away from how shiny it is. Oh my gosh. Adding a gloss varnish is totally optional. If you're going to write a message on your painting like I intend to, then the varnish should go on before you write the message, because the varnish can probably lift the message and smear, you know, the ink that you might be using to write with. I'm going to use an alcohol pen a little bit later. So I'm going to varnish first to give everything just sort of a nice, smooth, waterproof finish. These little paintings are really perfect for any kind of thing. You know, they can be teeny tiny wall art that you hang around your desk or give to somebody. You can make them as a card, as a really unique greeting card for someone. You could put a little message to them on the painting. They could also be like a coaster for your ridiculous kitty mug that you bring out during professional meetings sometimes. So I'm going to use this Copic marker on top of, I let the varnish dry completely before I did this part, and I'm using a Copic sketcher with a brush nib just to create a little reminder for myself to remember to be kind, because that's hard. Sometimes I have a hard time with kindness, you know, toward other people and toward myself, of course. Don't we all? Oh my gosh. I just had an intense amount of anxiety just this moment, wondering if I had misspelled kindness. It looks strange when it's written really slowly and in cursive. And I've been looking at this a lot as I've been editing this video. And so for a minute there, it looked like it was misspelled, but I think it's okay. So there's my finished piece. I've done this project a few times now. I've got a few different versions, all little reminders for things that I think are valuable in my life and want to kind of continue to cultivate and be part of. This Stop Hate one I really, really love. I mean, I love them all because they're my creations and I want to cultivate love for them. Little mushrooms at the bottom. This one of sort of an undersea garden. I don't know, I got like a shark in the background and like the silhouette of faraway fishes that I thought was really neat. And then this is an earlier succulents attempt. It's a little bit different, but I still think it's pretty cool. And so this one is on my desk now, reminding me about kindness and how it's a thing. And I love this for that reminder, for the reminder and the practice that all kinds of colors can be made out of the primary colors. You don't need super special things to make art that is meaningful. And also just a little reminder to slow down. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm going to leave you with this little scene from a lavender bush I saw on my way home from a little walk today. Just teeming with life and wonderful things. Thank you so much for joining me for this art adventure. designer.